Mike Waverly was 37 years old when his wife handed him 2 bags, pointed at the door, and told him she needed a man who was already there. She left him for someone with a higher ceiling, and walked away from their marriage without a second look. What she also walked away from, without knowing it, was a signed divorce settlement waiving every claim to the logistics startup she had called another one of your daydreams. 5 years later, that company was worth $500 million. Mike had found the woman he was meant to marry, and on the morning of his wedding, surrounded by the people who had watched him build everything from nothing, the doors opened. Adrienne walked in dressed like she'd been invited, demand letter in hand, voice steady, chin raised, and told the room she was there to collect her cut. She had no idea what Mike had been quietly building in the years since she walked out, and she had no idea what was already waiting for her in that manila folder. Before we jump into the story, comment where in the world you are watching from and subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you need to hear. The coffee was black. No sugar, no cream. Mike Waverly lifted the cup and stood at the window of his hotel suite, looking out at Atlanta. The city was already awake. It hummed and stretched below him, cranes on the skyline, morning traffic moving slow, the sun just starting to burn through the haze. He watched it without hurry. A man with nowhere to be for another 3 hours, and no intention of wasting a single minute of that quiet. The suit hung behind him on the closet door. Navy, custom cut. He had picked up the final fitting himself 2 weeks ago, carrying it out of the tailor's shop in a long garment bag like something precious, which it was. Not because of what it cost, because of what it meant. He had owned 2 suits at 37. 2. One black, one charcoal, both from the same department store rack. He took a sip of coffee and let his eyes move across the suite. The polished floors, the fresh flowers the hotel had left on the table, the small framed photo of his mother sitting on the nightstand. Brenda Waverly, 67 years old in that picture, standing in front of her little house in southwest Atlanta, squinting into the sun and smiling like she had just heard some very good news. He kept the photo with him when he traveled. Had for 3 years now. On the bed, folded once and pressed flat like it was something official, was the note. He crossed the room and picked it up again. His 4th time reading it since it appeared under his door sometime before 6 in the morning. Mike, I know you're awake. I know you're drinking your coffee and looking at the city and trying to act like today is just another Tuesday. It isn't. Today, you let somebody love you in front of everybody. That's the bravest thing I've ever seen you agree to do. I'll see you at the altar. See. He stood there for a moment with the note in his hand. Then he set it down carefully, exactly where it had been. He had known Celeste Morgan for 3 years. He knew the way she laughed when something actually caught her off guard. A sharp little sound, almost surprised at itself. He knew she kept a yellow legal pad on her nightstand and wrote down thoughts at 2 in the morning when a case was bothering her. He knew she took her coffee with 1 sugar and drank it fast, standing over the kitchen counter, like she had already decided the morning owed her something. He knew that when she looked at him, really looked at him, she was not looking at what he had built. She was looking at who built it. That was new. That had never happened before. Not the way it happened with Celeste. He moved back to the window. 5 years ago, he had been a different version of himself. Same man underneath. Same discipline. Same patience. Same slow-burning certainty that he was heading somewhere worth going. But the life wrapped around that man had been wrong. Ill-fitting. Like wearing someone else's jacket and trying to move naturally in it. He had been 37. Operations director at Hartwell Freight Solutions, a mid-sized company with decent margins and no real vision. He was good at the job. Too good for it, if he was being honest, which was something he had learned to be. His business plan for Wavcor, a logistics and real estate services firm built on a model he had been refining for 3 years, sat in a folder on his home laptop, organized down to the quarterly projections. He had revised it 11 times. He knew what it was worth. His wife had not agreed. Adrienne. He said the name in his head the way you press a bruise that has mostly healed, just to know it doesn't hurt the same way anymore. She had called the pitch deck another one of your daydreams. Not once, multiple times. The last time with a kind of tired contempt that told him she had stopped even trying to hide how she felt. Adrienne had wanted a life that was already assembled. The address, the circle, the label. She was a woman who wanted to move into success, not build it. She had looked at his planning and seen stagnation. She had looked at his patience and seen weakness. She left him on a Tuesday. He remembered that with strange clarity. A Tuesday in October, the kitchen smelling like the coffee she had already finished by the time he came downstairs. She was standing near the window. She had her arms crossed. She told him she needed a man who was already there, like there was a place he was supposed to have arrived at and had simply failed to show up. She asked him to be out of the house by Friday. He did not beg. He did not negotiate. He did not raise his voice or slam a single door. He packed 2 bags, drove to his mother's house, slept on an air mattress in Brenda's spare room, his laptop open on the carpet beside him, WavCore still running in 17 browser tabs. 8 months later, the company was operational. 48 hours ago, it had closed a private equity deal. $500 million. The number was not public yet. A handful of people knew. His attorney, Philip, Celeste. The firm on the other side of the table. That was the full list. Adrienne was not on it. She had left 6 months before his first seed round closed. $2 million, which at the time had felt like the whole world, and in hindsight was just the beginning of the beginning. She had walked out of his life, of her own free will, in her own good time, for a man she believed had a higher ceiling, and she had never looked back. He had looked back once, briefly. From the right distance, it looked exactly like what it was. The best thing that ever happened to him, wearing a bad disguise. He turned from the window and looked at the suit. Then he looked at the photo of his mother. Then he picked up his coffee, finished the last of it, set the cup down on the windowsill with a small, precise click. He crossed to the closet, lifted the suit off the door, carried it to the mirror, took his time. He pulled on the jacket and settled it across his shoulders, smoothed the lapels with both hands, and stood there for a moment looking at the man in the glass, 42 years old. 2 bags to his name 5 years ago. The company his ex-wife had called a daydream was now worth $500 million. He allowed himself one smile, small, private, the kind that doesn't need an audience. "Let's go," he said. The hallway between the 2 suites was short. 6 steps, maybe 7. Mike knocked twice on the connecting door, not waiting for an answer before he pushed it open. Philip Okafor was standing at the bathroom mirror in his dress shirt and slacks, working a pair of cufflinks with the focused patience of a man diffusing something small and delicate. He glanced at Mike in the reflection and nodded once, the way he always nodded, like a confirmation of something already agreed upon. "You eat anything?" Philip asked. "Coffee." "That's not eating." It was a big cup. Philip made a sound that was not quite a laugh, but lived in the same neighborhood. He got the second cufflink in and turned from the mirror, shaking his wrist once to settle it into place. He was a big man, broad across the shoulders, with close-cut hair, and the kind of stillness that most people needed a decade of hard experience to develop. He had built that stillness the same way Mike had, through work, through setbacks, through learning that panic was a luxury neither of them could ever afford. They had met 9 years ago at a logistics conference in Charlotte. Philip had been running operations for a regional distribution firm. Mike had been the smartest person in every breakout session and the least recognized, which was something Philip noticed immediately and found interesting. They exchanged cards, had dinner, talked until the hotel bar closed. 2 months later, Philip took a pay cut to join Wavecore when it was still a spreadsheet and a storage unit full of clipboards. He had never said that was the best decision he ever made. He didn't need to. Mike leaned against the door frame and watched him reach for his jacket. "Brenda call you this morning?" Mike asked. "6:45. She wanted to make sure I had the ring." "Do you?" Philip gave him a look, the kind that said the question didn't deserve a verbal response. He patted the breast pocket of his jacket once, a single assured tap, and went back to getting dressed. The room was neat. Philip was always neat. His shoes were lined up at the foot of the bed. His phone was charging at a right angle to the nightstand lamp. His garment bag was hanging on the closet door with the same intentional care Mike had given his own. This was the thing about Philip that most people never fully understood. They saw the efficiency and called it coldness. They saw the composure and called it distance. What it actually was respect. Respect for the work, for the moment, for the people he showed up for. When Philip Okafor made himself present for something, he made himself fully present. He had done that every day for 9 years. Mike watched him straighten the jacket across his shoulders and thought, not for the first time, that he had been quietly lucky in ways that had nothing to do with money. "She's not going to believe it," Philip said, catching Mike's eye in the mirror again. "When she finds out, she's going to lose her mind in the best possible way." He was talking about Celeste, about the wedding surprise Mike had arranged, a string quartet playing the arrangement of a song she'd mentioned once, almost in passing, at 2 a.m. during a conversation she probably thought he hadn't fully registered. He had written it down the next morning, had been planning around it for 4 months. That was the kind of thing you did for someone who paid attention to you the way Celeste paid attention to him. He had met her 3 years ago at a fundraiser for a legal aid nonprofit downtown, the kind of event that filled a room with good suits and good intentions, and varying degrees of both. Mike had written a check, not a small one, and when the photographer from the organization started moving through the room documenting donors, he had stepped back, out of the frame, and let it happen without him. Celeste had been standing nearby. She noticed. She didn't say anything right away. She waited until the photographer moved on. Then she came over with a glass of sparkling water and said, simply, "Most people at these things want the photo." "I'm not most people," he said. "No," she said, looking at him like she was deciding something. "I don't think you are." Her name was Celeste Morgan. He found that out when they were introduced by the executive director 5 minutes later. She was on the board. She was a civil rights attorney who had, in the past 18 months, argued 2 cases that made national news and treated both with the same brisk focus she applied to a glass of sparkling water at a fundraiser. She was 39, she did not perform warmth, and she was the warmest person he had ever met. He called her 4 days later. They had dinner. She asked him about Wavecore before the appetizers arrived. Not as small talk, but with the focused curiosity of someone who had actually looked into it and found something worth asking about. She asked about the operational model. She asked about the real estate component. She asked about his timeline, and when he said 18 months on a particular milestone, she nodded and said, "What's your contingency if that slips?" Nobody had ever asked him that. Not like that. His first marriage had been full of polite silences on the subject of his work. Adrienne had moved through his plans the way you move through a room you're not interested in, present, technically, but already thinking about somewhere else. Celeste moved into what he said, and looked around and asked what was in the corners. She came into his life when Wavecore had traction, but not yet mass. She had seen the 3 a.m. spreadsheets, had, more than once, woken at 2 a.m. to find him still working at the kitchen table, a legal pad full of numbers and a second cup of cold coffee beside him. She had not told him to come to bed. She had pulled the chair out across from him and said, "Tell me what you're stuck on." He told her. She was not an operations expert. She did not need to be. She was smart, and she was fully there. And sometimes that is the only tool a problem requires. She stayed through the difficult middle. The quarter where 2 key contracts fell through in the same month. The partnership negotiation that dragged 8 weeks past every reasonable deadline and then collapsed entirely. The morning he told her, very quietly, that he wasn't sure the timeline was going to hold, and she looked at him across the kitchen and said, "Okay, then we adjust the timeline." We. She had said we. Not in the easy way, not as a casual figure of speech. She said it like she had already done the math and confirmed her seat at the table. He had not forgotten that. He had never once confused what Celeste saw in him with what the PE deal had made possible. The money was the result. She had signed on for the process. The actual difficult, uncertain, grinding human process of it, and she had not flinched at a single mile of it. That was the woman waiting for him downstairs. "Come here," Philip said. Mike crossed to him. Philip reached up and straightened his tie. 2 small adjustments, quick and deliberate, then stepped back and looked at him squarely. Not the way you look at a man and compliment his suit. The way you look at someone after 9 years of building something together and let the silence say everything you don't need to put into words. "You ready?" Philip asked. Mike held his gaze. "Been ready." Philip picked up his phone from the nightstand, slipped it into his jacket pocket, and gestured toward the door. The 2 of them walked out of the suite together and moved down the hallway toward the elevator. Downstairs, outside the city, at a private estate with 80 chairs and fresh white flowers, and 1 woman in a dress who had chosen him at his valley. Everything was waiting. The estate sat 12 miles outside Atlanta, settled behind a long gravel drive lined with oak trees old enough to remember a different world. The main hall had high ceilings and tall windows that let the afternoon light pour in at an angle that turned everything it touched gold. 80 white chairs had been arranged in 2 rows, their backs tied with simple cream ribbon. At the front, where the aisle ended, there were white flowers, gardenias, and something small and green that Celeste had picked out in 10 minutes at the florist, while Mike stood beside her agreeing with everything because he genuinely agreed with everything. It was beautiful, quiet and real and beautiful. Brenda Waverly sat in the front row on the left side, her hands folded in her lap, her church hat the color of a perfect sky. She had been holding the tears back for 40 minutes. She had practice. She had been holding them since the night 5 years ago when she turned off the light in her spare room and heard the air mattress shift under her son's weight and thought, "He's going to be okay. He does not know that yet, but he is going to be okay." She had been right. She was always right. She had learned a long time ago to keep that particular fact quiet. Up at the altar, Mike stood with his hands clasped in front of him and his eyes on Celeste, who stood 3 feet away in a dress that was simple and right and exactly her. The officiant, an old family friend, a man who had known Mike since he was 12, was reaching the end. His voice was warm and unhurried. The room had that particular stillness that only happens when a group of people who genuinely love each other are all paying attention to the same thing at the same time. And so, by the authority vested in me, the doors at the back of the hall opened. Not flung, not slammed. Opened deliberately, with the kind of controlled push that is designed to look calm while announcing itself to every person in the room. Adrienne Ballard Waverly walked in. She was dressed as if she had been invited. That was the first thing. A fitted dress, heels that clicked on the hardwood, her hair arranged with the care of someone who had spent real time in front of a mirror this morning. She looked like a guest who had simply arrived late. She had calculated this. The appearance of belonging was its own kind of claim. She walked down the side aisle, not rushing, not hesitating. The walk of a woman who had told herself all morning that she was doing the brave thing. She stopped at the front of the room and turned to face it. For 1 second, nobody moved. "I'm sorry to interrupt." Her voice carried easily. She had made sure of that. "But before this is legal, we need to talk about what I'm owed." A brief pause. My cut. The silence that followed was total. She continued, her tone even, almost businesslike. The performance of a woman who had rehearsed this. She mentioned the divorce settlement. A morality clause, she said, improperly applied. She had retained an attorney. She had done her research. And she had, she said, learned things recently, things about a company valuation, that made it clear there were financial matters that had not been properly resolved. She produced an envelope from her clutch and held it in front of her like a verdict. The room did not breathe. Mike stood at the altar and watched her. His face gave nothing away. But behind his eyes, something was working very quickly. Because she had just said valuation. And the only way she could know about the PE deal was if someone had told her. The deal that had closed 48 hours ago. The deal that was airtight. His jaw tightened once, a single involuntary contraction, and then released completely. He turned to Celeste. Celeste was already watching Adrienne, not with shock, not with fury, with the focused, almost clinical calm of a woman who had stood in courtrooms and listened to people lie under oath and known exactly when they were finished. Her hands were still. Her breathing was even. She looked like a woman taking notes. Mike said, quietly enough that only she could hear, "I've got this." Celeste turned to look at him, just briefly. Her eyes said, "I know you do." He turned back to Adrienne. He let a moment pass, one full, unhurried beat of silence, and then he smiled. Not widely, just once. The smile of a man who has been waiting a long time to see where a road was going to end. "You should have called my attorney," he said. Then he looked at Philip. Philip was already moving. He crossed the room without a word, no ceremony, no hesitation, and took up a position at Adrienne's side that left no room for interpretation. His hand did not grab. It simply appeared at her elbow, firm and final, and he began moving toward the door. Adrienne had one moment where she seemed to consider resisting. She looked at the envelope in her hand. Philip did not slow down. The doors opened. They passed through. The doors closed behind them. For a moment, the room simply existed. Then the officiant, who had been a preacher for 31 years and had seen most things, cleared his throat gently and said, "Now, where were we?" And the room exhaled, all of it at once, and someone near the back let out a sound that was half laugh and half relief, and that was the permission everyone needed. The vows were completed. The words were said. Mike slid the ring onto Celeste's finger with steady hands, and she looked at him like she knew every chapter of the story she was stepping into and had made her choice with full information, which was the truth. The officiant said the words, the real ones, the final ones. They kissed. The room came alive. They walked back up the aisle together, Celeste's hand in his, her fingers pressed against his palm like she was taking his pulse or offering him hers. It was impossible to say which direction the steadiness was flowing, and that was the right way for it to be. Their guests stood on either side, clapping, some crying, Brenda in the front row with a tear running clean down her left cheek that she made no effort to stop. Mike caught her eye as he passed. She nodded once, small and certain. "I told you so," the nod said, in the most loving way a person could say a thing without saying it. Outside, past the tall doors, somewhere on the grounds of the estate, Adrienne was still there. Mike knew she hadn't left. She wouldn't. She had come too far inside her own plan to walk away from it now. Whatever she was feeling, whatever story she was still telling herself out there in the afternoon sun, she was waiting. And Mike had no intention of letting her wait forever. The reception was alive behind the garden wall. Mike could hear it. the low thrum of conversation, the clink of glasses, the band working through something smooth and unhurried that drifted out through the tall windows and into the evening air. Inside, 80 people who loved him were eating good food and telling true stories and dancing the way people dance when they are genuinely happy for someone else. Out here, the garden was quiet and dark and smelled like cut grass. Mike stood with his jacket still on, hands loose at his sides, and watched Philip finish the second call. Philip ended it without a goodbye, just a tap of the screen and a silence that meant he had what he needed. He slid the phone into his breast pocket and turned to face Mike. "Troy," Philip said. Mike waited. "Adrian's brother." Philip kept his voice flat and even, the way he always did when the facts were the most important thing in the room. "He works commercial insurance down on Peachtree. Has a fraternity brother over at Meridian Capital. Not a partner. Mid-level, operations side. But mid-level is enough if you're in the right hallway at the right time." "The term sheet," Mike said. Not a question. "The term sheet. Closing dinner. Someone talked about it in a place where they shouldn't have. Troy heard something, connected it to you, and had the information to Adrian inside 48 hours of the deal closing." Mike nodded slowly. He looked at the stone wall in front of him. An old climbing rose had wrapped itself around the top of it, thorns and new growth tangled together. He looked at it for a moment, not really seeing it. "How long has she been watching?" he said. Philip's jaw tightened. "That's the part you're not going to love." He pulled out his phone again and read from a note he'd taken. "Troy has been feeding her updates on your business profile for at least 14 months. LinkedIn activity. Press mentions. Anything that came up in conversation with people who knew you professionally. She wasn't doing this by accident. She's been sitting on it, waiting for the right number. The right number. $500 million was a very right number." Mike stood with that information. He did not react to it the way a man might be expected to react. No sharp exhale, no tightening of the fists, no change in the set of his shoulders. He just let it settle, the way he had always let hard information settle, like sediment in still water. Give it time. Let it clarify. Then you could see what you were actually dealing with. He had always known Troy was a talker. Troy had been trading in access and information since college, a man who turned other people's business into social currency because he didn't have enough of his own to spend. It was not malicious in any precise way. It was just who Troy was. A weak link who had never once considered that weak links get found. What Mike had not known was how long Adrian had been watching, how patient she had been, how deliberate. She had not shown up at his wedding on impulse. She had been running a quiet surveillance operation for over a year and walked in the moment she had a number big enough to justify the move. She had dressed for it, timed it, performed it. She had planned this the way someone plans something they believe they will win. "I want to pull Troy's employer into it," Philip said. "Information breach. He used a confidential PE transaction to feed intel to a third party. That's not nothing. That's potentially his license." "I know. And there's the sanction filing. Linda can have it drafted by Monday morning." "I know." "Mike." "Not yet." Mike said it quietly, without any edge. It was not a rebuke. It was a decision. Let her wait. Let her think she rattled me. Philip looked at him for a long moment. Then he nodded. He understood the logic, even if his instinct ran faster than his patience. The legal picture was straightforward enough. Mike had reviewed it thoroughly in his head, while standing at an altar, watching the woman try to blow up the best day of his life. The divorce had been finalized 4 years ago. In the settlement, Adrian had signed an explicit written waiver of any claim to Wavcor. Her own attorney had documented the reasoning in a memo. The language was almost painful in its clarity, speculative in nature, unlikely to produce significant returns, client-elect's full waiver. That memo existed. That signature was real. Whatever legal theory she was now operating on was built on sand, but sand could still make noise. A headline didn't need to survive a motion to dismiss. It just needed to run. Mike knew this. He had known it the moment she said the word valuation in front of 80 people. He straightened his jacket, glanced toward the lit windows of the hall, where shadows moved, and the music kept playing. "Come on," he said. They went back inside. Celeste was at their table talking to Brenda, both of them laughing at something. A real laugh, easy and full. Mike crossed the room toward her, and she saw him coming, and the laugh softened into a smile that was just for him. He sat down beside her and took her hand. He leaned close enough that only she could hear him over the music, and the voices, and the warm noise of everything they had built together, filling the room around them. "Tonight we celebrate," he said. "Tomorrow we work." Celeste pulled back just enough to look at his face. She read it the way she read everything, carefully, completely, without rushing to a conclusion she hadn't earned yet. Then she nodded once. She understood completely. The reception had wound down slowly, the way good parties do. Guests drifting out in pairs, someone's uncle still at the bar at 11, Brenda holding court near the door with the easy authority of a woman who has earned every room she has ever stood in. By midnight, the estate was quiet. By 12:30, it was theirs alone. The honeymoon suite was on the top floor. Soft lamplight, cream and gold. A window that looked out over the dark tree line. Someone had placed white roses on the bureau and turned down the bed. The gesture was kind. Neither of them had touched it. They sat together at the foot of the bed, still dressed, his tie loosened, her heels set aside, both of them carrying the particular exhaustion of a day that had asked more than a wedding day should. Not broken, just settled. The way you feel after something is finally over. Celeste reached for the water pitcher on the nightstand and filled 2 glasses. She handed one to Mike and held her own, and looked at him. "How bad was it?" she said. "The real version." He looked at the glass in his hand. He had carried this for 14 months. He had not told Philip. He had not told Brenda, because telling Brenda meant watching his mother carry it too, and she had already carried enough on his behalf. He had told no one. He had taken the information Arthur Webb gave him, folded it carefully, and placed it somewhere deep and quiet inside himself, the way you put something dangerous in a locked drawer. Not because you're done with it, but because you're not ready to use it yet. He looked at Celeste. He was ready. "There was an investor," Mike said, "before the seed round. Before any of it was real to anyone but me." He set the glass down on the carpet between his feet. His name was Arthur Webb. Retired logistics executive, 40 years in the industry, knew how freight systems actually work. Not a man you had to explain fundamentals to. He'd been to 3 of my pitch sessions. He understood it. He paused. He told me, to my face, at dinner, that he was in for $600,000. Celeste was still. Just listening. That was real money then. Seed round money. The kind of number that makes other people start believing, because they see that someone serious already does. Mike's voice stayed even, steady, like he was reading from a report. 6 weeks later, he withdrew. No explanation. A 2-line email saying he was stepping back from early-stage investments. Very polite. Very nothing. He looked at the window. "I spent 8 months thinking I had done something wrong in that room. Said the wrong thing. Missed something in the numbers. I went back over every slide, every conversation, every follow-up email. I couldn't find it." He exhaled slowly. "So I rebuilt the approach. Found different investors, smaller pieces from more people. Took twice as long and cost me twice the equity. But I got it done." "Mike." Her voice was quiet. Not interrupting, just letting him know she was there. 14 months ago, Arthur Webb called me. He had read about Wavcor in a logistics industry journal. The company was profitable, growing, and I was named specifically. He picked the water glass back up but didn't drink from it. He said he needed to tell me something, that he had felt guilty for years and couldn't leave it alone anymore. He stopped. Adrian had contacted him. After that dinner, privately, without my knowledge, she told him I had mental health struggles I wasn't managing properly, that the business plan was something I was using to cope with personal instability, that she was worried about me. Silence. She told him, Mike continued, his voice unchanged, that she was sharing it because she cared about him and his family's money, and didn't want to see them hurt by something she could see coming. He set the glass down again. She did that 6 months before she left, which means she was sitting across from me at dinner every night, in our bed, in our house, and she was already running plays against me. She wasn't just leaving. She was making sure there was nothing to come back to. Celeste had not moved, had not offered a single word of reassurance or outrage, had not rushed to fill any of the silence with something easier. She had just listened, completely, the way only certain people know how to. When he finished, she reached over and took his hand. Not both hands, just one of hers, placed over his, warm and steady. Neither of them spoke for a long moment. The lamplight held. Outside, the tree line was dark and still. Then, Celeste said it, quietly, without performance, with the kind of certainty that doesn't need to be raised to be heard. She picked the wrong man to underestimate. The morning came in slow and quiet. Sunlight pressed through the curtains in long, pale strips. The white roses on the bureau had started to open overnight. The city beyond the window was already moving. Atlanta never fully stopped. But up here, on the top floor, it was still. Mike was at the desk by 7. He had slept 4 hours. That was enough. He had a cup of black coffee at his right hand, the unsealed demand letter flat on the desk in front of him, and his attorney's voice coming through the phone on speaker. Celeste sat in the chair near the window with her own coffee, legs tucked beneath her, listening. "The legal theory is weak," said the attorney. His name was Gerald Foss, and he had been Mike's counsel since Wavcor's first term sheet. He was careful and precise, and did not waste words. The commingled assets argument doesn't hold because there were no marital funds invested in Wavcor. The company was incorporated 4 months after the divorce was finalized. The oral promise claim relies entirely on her assertion that you verbally agreed to include her in any future venture proceeds. There is nothing in writing. There is no witness named. It would not survive a motion to dismiss. "I know," Mike said. A brief pause. "You knew before you called me. I needed to hear you say it." Gerald cleared his throat. "The exposure isn't the lawsuit, Mike. You understand that. Tell me anyway. The exposure is the story. If she gets to a journalist first, the right kind of journalist, the kind who moves fast and doesn't verify, the headline writes itself. Ex-wife claims she was cut out of $500 or empire. It runs before anyone pulls the divorce decree, before anyone reads the settlement. The correction, if it comes, runs on page 8, 3 weeks later. The damage is done in the first 48 hours. Mike looked at the letter. It was 3 pages, dense with legal language, dressed to look weightier than it was. The kind of document designed to intimidate someone who doesn't know what they're reading. He had read it twice this morning and once last night. He had identified the 3 weakest paragraphs before his coffee finished brewing. "I want to file for sanctions," Gerald said. "We have grounds." Her attorney had to know this claim is frivolous. "Not yet," Mike said. "Mike." "Not yet, Gerald. Thank you." He ended the call. Philip arrived 11 minutes later. He knocked twice and let himself in. The kind of entry that required no announcement between men who had shared 100 early mornings exactly like this one. He had a coffee of his own, and the look on his face that he always wore when he had already done 3 things before anyone asked him to. He took a seat at the small table near the desk, looked at the letter, looked at Mike. Celeste shifted in the chair by the window, watching both of them. "Gerald wants sanctions," Mike said. "Gerald is right," Philip said. "Philip wants to contact Troy's employer," Mike said to Celeste. "Philip is also right," Philip said, without missing a beat. Celeste almost smiled. Mike's phone buzzed once on the desk. He glanced at the screen. His mother. He picked it up. "I was going to call you in 5 minutes," he said. Brenda Waverly's voice came through with the easy authority of a woman who has never once waited to be asked. "Baby, I want you to tell me where Adrienne's mother lives, because I have some things to say to that woman that I have been holding for 5 years, and I am done holding them." "Mama." "Don't mama me. I watched that woman walk into your wedding like she had a right to be there. I was sitting in the front row. I know you were. I had my good dress on. You looked beautiful." A pause. "Don't try to smooth me over." But her voice had softened, just slightly. "Are you all right?" "I'm fine, I promise." "Celeste all right?" "She's sitting right here." "She's better than fine." Another pause. "Good. She's a good woman, Michael. You hold on to that." He could hear her settling, the way she always did when she knew he had things under control. Not because she stopped caring, but because she trusted him. "You're going to handle this the right way." It was not a question. "I'm going to handle it," he said. After he hung up, the suite was quiet for a moment. 3 people and 1 unsealed letter, and a problem that had more than one correct solution. Mike looked at Philip, then at Celeste. Then he picked up his phone, found the number, and dialed. It rang twice. "Hello?" Adrienne's voice was measured, prepared. "It's Mike." He kept his voice even, businesslike, offering nothing. "I'd like to meet. 2 days from now, just the 2 of us. No attorneys." A pause. "There are things worth discussing in person." A beat of silence on her end. He could feel her reading it, calculating. "Fine," she said. "Where?" He gave her the address of a conference room he had already booked. He said goodbye and ended the call. He set the phone down on the desk. He looked at Philip. "She thinks she won round 1. Philip picked up his coffee. "Let her." They checked out of the hotel at 10. The drive home took 40 minutes. Celeste had the window down, her elbow resting on the door, watching the city give way to wider roads and old trees and the quiet stretches of green that always marked the approach to their neighborhood. Mike drove. Neither of them felt the need to fill the silence. The house was exactly as they had left it 2 days ago. Furniture, fresh paint smell, a set of wedding gifts stacked neatly near the front door by the neighbor who had a spare key. It was a good house, not a statement, just good. Wide windows, hardwood floors the color of dark honey, a garden out back that Brenda had already volunteered to help plant. Celeste dropped her bag in the hallway and carried her garment bag upstairs. Mike brought in both suitcases, set them at the foot of the stairs, and went to the kitchen to start a pot of coffee. While the coffee brewed, he opened his laptop on the kitchen counter. He found Arthur Webb's number in his contacts. Looked at it for a moment. Then he dialed. Arthur picked up on the second ring. He was 71 years old, a retired logistics executive who had built and sold 2 companies in his career. His voice had the measured weight of a man who chose his words because he had earned the right to. "Mike, I've been expecting your call. I need something from you, Arthur." Mike kept his voice level. "I need a written account, notarized, of everything Adrienne said to you before you withdrew. The full conversation, dated, every detail you remember." A pause, not hesitation. The pause of a man deciding how to say yes in a way that carries its full meaning. "I've had that account written and sitting in a drawer for 14 months, Arthur said. "I typed it up the same week I called you. Didn't know if you'd ever need it. Hoped you wouldn't. But I kept it ready." A short pause. "I'll have it notarized today and messengered to your office by tomorrow morning." "Thank you, Arthur." "Don't thank me. I should have called you the day she showed up at my door." His voice was even but firm, The way that old regret sounds when it has been sitting long enough to become something useful. You let me know if there's anything else. Mike ended the call. He poured his coffee. He stood at the counter for a moment, looking out the kitchen window at the backyard. The garden was just a stretch of good dirt right now. Brenda was going to love fixing that. He picked up his phone and sent Philip 3 words: "Pull the documents." Philip's reply came back in under 2 minutes. It was 1 word: "Already did." Mike almost smiled. He carried his coffee to the desk in the study and sat down. Philip had already uploaded a shared folder with the core divorce proceeding documents, the signed settlement, the asset schedule, the WAV-core waiver. Mike opened each one and read through them with the same care he would give a term sheet. The waiver was on page 6 of the settlement agreement. Adrienne's signature was at the bottom in blue ink, neat and unhurried. She had signed it without hesitation because she had not believed for a single second that it would ever matter. The attorney's memo was in a separate file. Philip had pulled it from the record of an unrelated deposition, a small civil matter filed 2 years ago, where Adrienne's divorce attorney had been deposed as a witness on a procedural question. The memo had been entered into evidence as a background document and never scrutinized. It was 4 paragraphs long. The relevant line was in the 3rd paragraph. The client expressed no confidence in the venture's long-term viability and elected to waive any potential claim in exchange for a clean settlement and expedited close. Her words, her choice. In her attorney's handwriting, transcribed to a typed memo, filed in a court record, Mike highlighted the line. He called Brenda at 3 in the afternoon. She answered with, "Tell me you're not calling to work. You just got married yesterday." "I'm calling to check in." A beat. "You're working." "A little." He heard her exhale. The particular exhale that meant she was choosing patience. "How's the house?" "Good. Quiet. Celeste likes it." "Course she does. She has good sense." Then, without shifting her tone, "I knew what that woman was the first time she picked up her phone in the middle of dinner when you were talking. You were explaining something to her. I don't even remember what it was. And she just picked up her phone and started scrolling. Didn't even look up." A pause. "I kept my mouth shut because you loved her, and it wasn't my place. But I knew. I know you knew. You take your time, baby. Do it right. You've been doing this long enough that you know how." A warmth in her voice, quiet and sure. "I love you. Love you too, Mama." After the call, the house settled into the particular stillness of late afternoon. Celeste had gone upstairs to unpack. The coffee had gone cold. The folder on Mike's desk was organized, labeled, and complete. He reached up to the shelf above his desk and took down a photograph in a plain black frame. It was a picture someone had taken without asking. His mother, he thought, though she had never confirmed it. He was sitting on the floor of her spare room, back against the wall, laptop open on his knees. The air mattress was visible behind him. He was looking at the screen with the particular focus of a man who had nothing left to lose and had decided to treat that as an advantage. He kept it framed, not as a wound, as a compass. He looked at it for a long moment. Then he set it back on the shelf, closed the folder, and placed it beside his laptop. He went to find Celeste. She was in the kitchen, her back to him, the overhead light warm and low. He crossed the room and wrapped his arms around her from behind, and she settled back against him without a word. They stood there quietly. Tomorrow was the meeting. The office building was on Peachtree Street, 12 floors up, with a view of downtown Atlanta that cost nothing because Mike had not rented the space for the view. He had rented it because it was neutral. Not his office, not hers. A conference room with a rectangular table, 6 chairs, a water pitcher, and no art on the walls. Nothing that belonged to either of them. They arrived at 8:40. The meeting was at 9. Mike set the manila folder on the table in front of him and did not open it. Philip sat against the wall to the left, jacket buttoned, hands folded. He had not said much on the drive over. He didn't need to. The two of them had been in enough rooms together that silence between them was never empty. It was just stored energy. Waiting. Mike poured himself a glass of water and looked out the window. At 9:07, Adrienne walked in. She was dressed well. That was the first thing. A charcoal blazer, fitted. Hair done. Makeup precise. She had put in the work of looking like someone who belonged in a room like this, and she had mostly succeeded, which was always her particular skill. She carried a leather portfolio and the demand letter inside it, and she set both on the table across from Mike, with the deliberate care of someone who had rehearsed the gesture. She glanced at Philip. He looked back at her and said nothing. She sat down. "Thank you for meeting me," she said. Her voice was composed, almost warm, with just enough formality underneath it to signal that she considered this a professional engagement. "I want you to know I didn't come to your wedding to cause a scene. I came because time was running out and you weren't returning my calls." Mike did not respond to that. He just watched her. She opened the portfolio. She laid out her argument with rehearsed fluency, citing the morality clause, the timeline of the PE deal, the structure of their marriage during the early development of WavCore. She used the word partner twice. She said things like our shared foundation and the years I contributed to your stability and what the law recognizes as marital enterprise. She referenced her attorney. She slid the demand letter across the table and left her hand on it for a moment before withdrawing. She finished with, "I'm not here to fight. I'm here because what I'm asking for is fair." The room was quiet. Mike looked at her for a moment. Then he opened his folder. He did not say anything yet. He placed the first document on the table and slid it toward her. The signed divorce settlement, page 6, facing up. The WavCore waiver, highlighted in yellow. Her signature at the bottom in blue ink, neat and unhurried. She looked at it. Her chin lifted slightly. He placed the second document beside the first. Her divorce attorney's memo, the third paragraph uppermost. The highlighted line read, "The client expressed no confidence in the venture's long-term viability and elected to waive any potential claim in exchange for a clean settlement and expedited close." Something shifted behind her eyes. Not panic. Not yet. The particular stillness of someone who has just seen a card they did not know was in the deck. Mike placed the third document on the table. He looked at her. Then he picked up Arthur Webb's notarized letter and began to read it aloud, slowly. Arthur's voice on the page was plain and precise. The account of a man who had been carrying guilt for over a year and had written every word with the care of someone making a formal correction. He described the dinner party. He described Adrienne's call. He transcribed, to the best of his recollection, exactly what she had said. That Mike had mental health struggles he wasn't managing. That the business plan was a coping mechanism. That she was concerned about his stability. Mike read every word. By the time he set the letter down, the color had left Adrienne's face. Not gradually. All at once, the way warmth leaves a room when a window breaks. Mike's voice stayed even. "You didn't just leave," he said. "You tried to bury me. While you were still sleeping in our bed, you were already running plays against me." Adrienne opened her mouth. He continued without raising his voice. "You signed away your claim because you didn't believe I would build this. That was your call to make, and you made it. You were wrong." He paused, just briefly. "That is not a legal argument. That is a consequence." He slid the folder across the table until it rested in front of her. "If your attorney files anything, mine will file for sanctions the same day. I will also pursue a tortious interference claim for what you did to my investor relationship. Every document in that folder becomes an exhibit. You will explain to a judge, and possibly a jury, why you tried to sabotage the business you are now claiming entitlement to." He stood. Philip stood. Adrienne remained in her chair. The portfolio was still open in front of her, the demand letter sitting beside Mike's documents, And for the first time in the story, she looked genuinely small. Not defeated in a dramatic way, but reduced, the way someone looks when the performance finally costs more than it's worth. Mike picked up his water glass, took one last sip, and set it down. He walked to the door. At the threshold, he stopped. He turned back once, not with heat, not with satisfaction, but with the quiet finality of a man who has carried something a long way and is now, at last, setting it down. "I hope you find what you're looking for, Adrienne." His voice was steady and without cruelty. "I genuinely mean that. But you won't find it here." He and Philip walked out. Philip drove. Mike watched Atlanta move past the passenger window. The highway was busy for a Tuesday morning. Delivery trucks, commuters, the ordinary machinery of a city that did not know or care what had just happened in a conference room on the 12th floor of a building on Peachtree Street. That felt right, somehow. The world had not shifted. Only the weight Mike had been carrying had. They rode without talking for almost 10 minutes. Then Philip said, "How do you feel?" Mike kept his eyes on the window. The skyline passed. A billboard. A overpass. Like it's over. A beat of silence. "Let's make sure it is." Philip nodded once and drove. The first domino fell 3 days later. Mike's attorney called at 10:30 on a Thursday morning. He did not call with celebration in his voice. He called the way lawyers do when the news is good, but the situation still warrants care. He reported that Adrienne's attorney had reviewed the full documentation package Mike's team had assembled and declined to file anything on her behalf. The case had no legal merit. That was the professional assessment. The less professional assessment, relayed secondhand and almost certainly accurate, was that the attorney had told Adrienne that proceeding would create significant personal exposure for her and none for Mike. Mike thanked him, ended the call, and went back to work. The second domino was Troy. Philip had been careful about it. He surfaced the information, Troy's leak, the fraternity connection, the timeline, through the right channel inside the PE firm during what appeared to be a routine aspect of Wavcor's ongoing integration process. He did not accuse. He simply made certain that the correct people had the correct facts and allowed the firm's own compliance process to do what compliance processes exist to do. Troy Ballard was placed on administrative leave within a week. The stated reason was a pending internal review of whether he had violated his firm's information confidentiality policies. The unstated reason was that he had, demonstrably, and everyone involved knew it. He called Adrienne the same afternoon the notice was delivered. Philip heard about the call secondhand through the same channel he had used to surface the information. According to the account, Troy was not calm. He wanted to know what she had done, what she had told people, whether she understood what she had started. Adrienne had no answer for him. The third piece moved on its own. Arthur Webb published a brief professional endorsement of Wavcor and of Mike personally in a logistics industry newsletter. 2 paragraphs, measured and precise in the way Arthur spoke and wrote. He cited Mike's operational vision, the company's growth trajectory, and what he called an early instinct, later confirmed that Waverly understood this industry at a foundational level. He had not told Mike he was going to write it. Mike read it on a Wednesday morning over coffee and sat with it for a moment before setting his phone down. To anyone who knew the history, the endorsement read exactly as what it was, a public correction. A man with standing in their industry saying, on the record, what he believed. People in the right rooms understood its meaning without needing it explained. Adrienne's social standing in Atlanta began to change, not in one moment, not with a confrontation or an announcement. The way these things actually happen, a slow and quiet withdrawal, invitations that stopped arriving, conversations that became shorter. The particular cooling that follows when the right story reaches the right people through the right channels. Mike said nothing publicly. He had not said anything publicly about any of it. He did not need to. Brenda, however, had mentioned the wedding interruption to her church circle. She had done so with complete precision. The words Adrienne used, the envelope she carried, the expression on Mike's face when he told her she should have called his attorney. Brenda was not a gossip. She was a woman who told the truth to people she trusted, and she trusted her church circle entirely. Brenda's church circle was large, and it had long memories. The final piece came from Philip, 8 days after the meeting. He called on a Sunday afternoon. Mike was at his desk, reviewing a document. He picked up on the second ring. Philip said, "I need to tell you something. The man she left you for." Mike set the document down. "He filed for personal bankruptcy 2 years ago. Company collapsed. From what I can find, she's been living on savings and borrowed money for close to 18 months. The line was quiet. Mike looked at the wall in front of him. He thought about the charcoal blazer, the leather portfolio, the rehearsed argument, delivered with borrowed confidence. She had not come to his wedding because she thought she was winning. She had come because she had nothing left. A long pause. "I'm not happy about that," Mike said. "Philip, I know." Mike, "Good. Write it down so you remember I said it." That evening, Mike sat at his desk at home, the folder closed beside his laptop, his phone quiet on the surface next to it. The house was still. Outside, through the window, Atlanta made its ordinary sounds: distant traffic, a neighbor's dog, the low hum of a city that never fully stopped. Celeste appeared in the doorway. She leaned against the frame and looked at him. "Is it done?" Mike looked up at her. "It's done." She crossed the room and sat down beside him, her shoulder pressed against his. Neither of them spoke. Outside, Atlanta hummed. 18 months later, the house smelled like coffee and morning. Mike sat at his desk near the window, a mug at his elbow, a document open on his screen. The light came in at a low angle, the way it does in early fall in Georgia. Warm, but not heavy, clean against the hardwood floor. Outside, a line of oak trees ran along the back of the property, their leaves just beginning to turn. Celeste was at the table across the room, a stack of case files open in front of her, a yellow legal pad beside them. She was reading with the same focused stillness she brought to everything. Not tense, just present, fully in it. Neither of them had said much since breakfast. It was not the quiet of two people who had run out of things to say. It was something else. The particular quiet of two people who had chosen each other correctly and no longer needed to fill the air to prove it. WavCore's PE integration had completed on schedule. Ahead of schedule, technically, though Mike never led with that. He had learned a long time ago that the people who talked loudest about their timeline were usually the ones most surprised when it slipped. He let the numbers speak. The $500 million valuation was holding. The IPO filing was in preparation. A controlled public offering, structured carefully, timed deliberately. Mike had reviewed every line of the prospectus himself. Old habit. He trusted his team, and he verified their work. Both things were true. 340 employees now. 6 states. The number he was proudest of was not the valuation or the headcount, but the composition. A deliberate third of his workforce sourced from communities that did not typically produce corporate logistics talent. Not because resumes came through the standard pipelines, but because Mike had built a different pipeline. He did not call it charity. He did not call it a program. He called it investment, because that is what it was. The same raw operational intelligence that had been present in him at 25 and dismissed as potential that needed seasoning. That same intelligence existed in rooms that were never invited to the table. He had simply started sending invitations. Celeste had made partner in the spring. She had come home that evening and told him the way she told him most important things, directly, without performance, in between taking off her coat and asking what he wanted for dinner. He had stopped her in the hallway and held her face in his hands and told her he was proud of her. She had laughed and said she knew. They had gone out to dinner anyway, somewhere quiet, just the two of them. Brenda's room was at the end of the hall. She occupied it 3 weeks out of every month now, returning to her own house only often enough to check the mail and see her own church circle on their home ground. Mike had set the room up before she arrived the first time. Proper furniture, good lighting, the television she liked mounted where she could see it from the bed. She had walked in, looked around, and said only, "Baby, you did good." He had not been able to speak for a moment. Philip was in the middle of raising his first fund. The announcement had gone out quietly, as Philip did everything, and the response from the investment community had been immediate and serious. Mike was his primary backer, not as a favor, as a conviction. The speaking invitation had come through a contact at a community college 12 miles from where Mike grew up. Not a prestigious institution, not a business school with a marble lobby and a naming sponsor. A community college with a parking lot that needed repaving and a business program that ran out of 2 classrooms and produced graduates who worked hard because they did not have the option of coasting. He said yes before the email was fully read. He stood at the front of a classroom of 23 students on a Wednesday afternoon and talked for 40 minutes. He did not use slides. He talked about operations, about patience, about the difference between a plan and a vision. He told them that the most valuable skill he had ever developed was one no professor could grade and no certification could verify: the ability to keep moving when someone who was supposed to believe in you decides not to. A student near the back raised her hand. Young woman, maybe 20, a notebook open in her lap, a pen she kept clicking without noticing. "Do you ever think about the people who doubted you?" Mike considered that for a moment. "Not often," he said. "But when I do, I try to remember that their doubt was information about them, not about me. I just had to figure out the difference." She wrote that down. He was home before 6. Celeste was still at her desk, the legal pad now covered in notes, a second cup of coffee gone cold beside her. She glanced up when he came through the door and gave him a look that asked how it went without using any words. He gave her a small nod that answered the same way. He looked in on Brenda. She was asleep in the chair by her bed, the television on low, one of her evening programs, the sound turned down to almost nothing. He reached over and pressed the button. The screen went dark. He pulled the door almost closed behind him. He went back to his desk, sat down, picked up his document where he had left it. His phone buzzed on the surface beside him. An industry alert. A competitor's name in the preview. He turned it face down without reading it and returned to his work. The house was quiet. The oak trees outside had gone dark against the evening sky. Mike Waverly was exactly where he was always going to end up. He just got there without her. I hope you enjoyed that one. Be sure to like the video and subscribe so you don't miss the next story. I've picked out 2 more for you that I think you'll really like.